Welcome to Night Shadows. I'm Stewart Best, where the paranormal is normal, where that which you thought you knew, you didn't, and where the future can be known if you know exactly where to look. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for tuning in and listening. We have a very special show tonight. We have author Daniel Holdings with us, who has written a number of books, and we've got In the Belly of the Beast, As the Darkness Falls, In Between the Veil, and now another one that is coming offline, and glad to have you on board, Daniel.
Well, thank you, Stewart. As always, it's great to be with you and Larry, and it's funny how things work out. I told you when you called me yesterday that I was actually just sitting here thinking about the first time that I ever heard you and Larry on the radio together. It was probably in excess of 10 years ago, and a young friend of mine handed me a CD, and he said, you need to listen to these guys, they're a hoot. And I was hooked. So I was actually thinking about that event when the phone rang, and it was you. So I think it's very serendipitous that I'm here tonight. I'm looking forward to everything that we bring out and put out on the table.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things going on. And welcome, Larry. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, doing fine. Glad to be on with you and Daniel tonight. And I'm just sitting here on my side of the round table and interested in the data.
Yeah, why don't we start, Daniel, with your new book, whatever you want to tell us about it, and when do you think you'll have it out, actually?
Well, I hope to have it out by Christmas, but I don't think that's going to happen. It'll probably be out the first of the year. It's called Midnight Strikes, Judgment Unleashed, the Holdings and Quayle interview. And, funny thing, Steve Quayle, in his last book, Jesus, the Premise of the Promise, he said that was the last book he was ever going to write. But, Steve's a friend, and I talk to him often. And so, I got on the phone with him one day, and I said, Steve, what about all these things that the Lord showed you, and there were several of them, that were going to happen, and you forgot about it? Because what had happened is when he first came to know the Lord, God showed him all of these things, a panoramic of the future of mankind, and then he forgot about them. And then the Lord told him that I'm going to remind you about them just before they come to pass, just before they happen. And so in the course of our conversations, he's telling me, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. So obviously the Lord had reminded him of all these things. So I got on the phone with him. I said, Steve, what about all these things that the Lord said he was going to remind you of? And he's done that. You haven't told the people those things. They need to hear them. And he said, Daniel, I can't write another book. I already said I wasn't going to. I said, well, what if I write it? And you and I will just have a discussion in the book, and I'll do some background on the various things that you're talking about, and we'll do it that way. And so he agreed, and for the course of the last, probably 10 months, we've been having this ongoing discussion about various things that are going on in the world. And, the difficult thing is, Stewart and Larry, things are happening so quickly that as soon as I get them down, something else changes. Something else happens. And
yes.
That book runs the full gambit of a variety of things, everything from, the economic collapse to civil war to World War III to cataclysmic disasters, the whole gambit of that stuff. So it's to surveillance, and I can't write it fast enough. It's just it's happening even faster than I can write it.
Well, what is your take on? Let me get into this a little bit. You've done some work probably on the arrival. What do you think is actually going to take place?
Well, I think I've said this for a number of years. I think they are going to disclose themselves. You know, we have always said that, you know, disclosure will change everything. But I think that what we will see is these entities disclosing themselves. They'll show up, and we will be faced with the reality that the universe is much smaller than we once thought it was.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting you say that, because of there's a Native American shaman lady. Her name was Noy. She died some time ago, and I know she's real. Excuse me, and valid, because I interviewed Red Elk, who knew her personally, and she made the remark that you just made, that they will reveal themselves, that there will be no real disclosure coming from at least the United States. So it's kind of interesting. She said when they arrive, here's the interesting part of what she said. Now, she's clearly Antichrist, and she makes that very clear. But she said what they're going to do when they arrive is that they will have absolute proof that I guess, that they are the creators, number one. Number two, that the Bible is full of mistakes and errors and has been totally misinterpreted, and that Adam and Eve were basically lies, and that it was not going to hold up anymore because of the proof that they were going to bring with them. And I just find it interesting that you've come to that same conclusion, that basically that there will be no disclosure except from themselves. What do you think, Larry? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question. Kind of been on my mind all day, Daniel. I know that you mentioned Steve Quayle and some stuff he had, and I know that you went to the True Legends 2019 conference there in Branson, Missouri, and I'm sure you listened to Steve, and some of the things he seemed to say, and I have watched that or viewed that conference. And it seems like basically, and I agree, and I think Dale and others agree, that the arrival is going to be two-phase. One phase is them coming up, and the other phase is them coming down, it appears. And so with that two-phase, there is a clue out there that's really interesting to me. We're aware of what Steve says about the giants, and a number of people have, of course, the Afghanistan giant, the live giant, by the way, and, all this information. But there's something that a lot of people says is just a conspiracy, but I wanted to ask your opinion of it because I know you were at the conference. You listened to Steve probably very closely, and matter of fact, he complimented you on his PowerPoint presentation. He couldn't have done it without you, and I'll just give you that credit because it was really, really good work, Daniel. But I wanted to ask you something. You're aware of Gary Vay and some of his postings, and, of course, the Italian website that has information about an entity named Mona Lisa. And, I've talked, I believe, before about an alien craft, a large one found on the moon, and a mysterious individual, believe it or not, that had a very unbelievable suit on that was keeping her alive. A female, by the way, and I posted on it, and Stewart and I've talked about it a lot, and her name that was given to her was Mona Lisa, and she was brought back to Earth from what the information I could read, especially from the Italian website, who interviewed some of the Russians, and it was apparently a Russian-U.S. joint venture on the moon of that craft, and of course, everybody poo-poos Mona Lisa. That's a painting. This is just conspiracy. But I wanted to bring this up, Daniel, and get your opinion, and then maybe Stuart's comment. I listened very intently to Steve's presentation, and he said, if you will, that he mentioned an entity a giant, by the way. He said by the name of Mona. I find that rather telling. The name of this giant is Mona, living in Russia, underground, in a base in Russia. She's a 14-foot tall, 600-pound female giant, and I know people now are blinking their eyes and saying, what is he talking about? But anyway, on a military base in Russia, and this information Steve Quayle said was per an informant by the name of Nikolai, and anyway, this is supposed to be also, Nikolai was part of Ultra Black Ops, not USA, but Russian apparently, and that the giants have something called a hive, or like the Borg, that they live in. So, if you will, kind of go into that, what he was talking about. I'm wondering, Daniel, really, this has clicked my mind once I watched that video, is the Mona Lisa, the conspiracy theory, if you will, that was reported on the moon in that craft and brought back live because of the suit that this entity was wearing. Could that be the same Mona that has been raised up now in Russia as an entity? Because if true, Steve said that she had the powers, the mind powers or the paranormal powers to kill someone. Just look at them, and they would drop dead. So what do you think, Daniel? I hate to throw that on you, but we're kind of in the weirdness, and this seems to fit.
That's a big question, a long question. So let me try to break it down. First of all, I need to go on the record. Okay, I happen to think that these aliens are in fact fallen angels in disguise. That's not to say that there aren't real aliens, but they don't need us. And these are interdimensional beings, which demons and angels are interdimensional beings. So I think the things that they say on the face of things are not necessarily the truth. And the reason I say this, Stewart, is because of what you were relating to me about this lady. I absolutely believe that these are the things that the Indian lady, what was her name, the Indian lady?
No Eyes.
No Eyes. I absolutely believe that these are the things that No Eyes saw and heard. I believe that, and she believes that. But I believe that this is the kind of thing that the enemy would say to us, right? So I just need to go on the record to say that. But
that's basically what she said. She basically does say that she's Antichrist and does not really believe the scriptures at all. So it's not that she's being dishonest. It's just that's if you follow where she's coming from and you realize that this is the strong delusion or the deception of Thessalonians, then it all starts to fall together. But you're right. Yeah. I think people need to realize that.
The reason that I bring it up in the context of Larry's question is because something very interesting that came out of that presentation. And Larry, honestly, it was an honor and a pleasure to do that presentation for Steve. He had never done a PowerPoint before. The guy's got so much information in his head, but he's not a logical thinker. He's the first one to tell you that. He is a big thinker, and he'll go all over the place if you allow him. So what that presentation did was caused him to go in a linear fashion, something that he wasn't used to at all. And what the guy did to me is he dumped a bunch of stuff on my desk and said, "Make sense of this." And it was a huge task. The presentation that he had was probably 115, 120 slides. And I told him, I said, "Steve, you're never going to be able to get all. I know you're not going to be able to get through all that." And sure enough, what you saw in that video and what he accomplished up on stage last year at True Legends was probably only about 65 to 70% of what he actually had. You didn't even get to see the really good stuff, the stuff that connected the dots. Well, one of those connection of dots I think you did see, excuse me, and I'm sorry, guys, I'm fighting bronchitis and laryngitis, and I'm trying to push through here. So if I hack a couple times, that's the reason for it. So one of the things that you did see in that presentation, Stewart, to your point earlier about what No Eyes was saying about they will disclose themselves and they will have proof that they are the creators, is a little-known instance. I think it was at the largest pyramid dig in Mexico at the time. It could have been Egypt, I forget now. Well, they uncovered actually buried deep under the pyramid, they found several sarcophaguses or several coffins with giants in them that were banded in brass, and it was thousands they found. Well, at that dig on the second day, during the midst of all this activity, they had noticed UFOs coming and going over the dig site. And then a few days later, they saw numerous UFOs, dozens and dozens of UFOs in the sky. Now get this, Stewart. What these UFOs did in the sky is they formed a DNA strand in the sky with their aircraft, as if to say, we created you. It was a human DNA strand, by the way.
I got a note here. It says, Dan, I got a note that says you're coming through kind of weaker. Is there any way you can? I know you got a cold, so maybe you can't talk any louder. But I just got a note passed to me about it's.
Let me try something here. Hold on one second. How's that? Is that any better?
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay. All right. I was trying to use my headset, and that wasn't working, I guess. All right. So what these UFOs did in the sky is they formed a double helix in the sky, human double helix in the sky, as if to say, we created you.
Yep.
Right? So to her point, they will try to make that argument. And, as to they're going to show us, inconsistencies in the Bible, and it's all, that is what the devil does. So I can't really speak any more to that other than say that sounds just like their modus operandi. I mean, now, as far as what you were asking me, Larry, about Mona and the Mona Lisa, now, out of everything that I saw of Steve's stuff, and I saw a bunch stuff that just hit the floor and never made it to the presentation itself, I don't think that was the Mona Lisa that you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. You and I have talked about this before, but it wasn't the same. This Mona, and that's just the name that the people on base gave her. They needed to call her something. That's what they called her. Her actual name, and she told it to Nikolai, was unpronounceable in human language. So they had to call her something, so that's what they called her. She was, in fact, a 14-foot giant, 600 pounds plus. She had a husband, and that didn't actually make the presentation. The husband was actually bigger than she was. And both of them were very fierce. She taught Nikolai all these things that were, what am I trying to say, the dormant skills and traits that we have from the garden. She was teaching him these kind of things, mental telepathy and stuff like that.
So the powers we lost.
Exactly, all the things that we lost. She had the ability to make this clicking sound. I think this is what you're referring to. She made this clicking sound in her mind, but you heard it audibly in the room. And so this is what Nikolai had related to everybody. So, or to Steve, I should say. Now,
where did they come
there was
from?
Another. What's that?
Where did they come from?
Well, she showed Nikolai a map of her home world, and her home world was deep underground. Her home world was, a city of giants down underneath the ground. And the interesting thing is, Stewart, she said, excuse me, she was ancient, and she told Nikolai, she said, once there was a time when we could roam above the earth with mankind, and we could roam freely. And man used to worship us. Doesn't that sound familiar?
Yes, it does.
She said, but then we were forced underground and were told we cannot come out. She said, but there's going to be a time in the very near future, and I believe this interaction between her and Nikolai happened, I don't know for sure, I'm guessing, in the 60s and 70s. She said there's going to be a time in the very near future when we come back up to the surface of the earth to rule. So they are coming back up, they meaning the giants, and they think they're going to rule. Now, there's an interesting passage out of the Septuagint that says, and it's only in the Septuagint, but it says that God will use the giants to fulfill his judgment. So is this what she is talking about? Well, it very well may be, because we've talked about portals opening up. I wrote this in my books because I actually saw it in my mind's eye. The Lord let me see the portals that were opening up. So there are these entities, both below and above, as Larry just said, that will be coming through these portals. And is that what she is talking about? Well, it could very well be. I mean, I don't really know, but I get the sneaky suspicion that we'll find out soon anyway.
Well, that's also in the book of Isaiah. Pray not that the giants come back again. So, yeah, that sounds very much like a judgment. What else you got, Larry? This is interesting stuff. And I know a lot of people probably rolling their eyes right now, but folks, the more you roll your eyes, probably the more true it is. Because it's always stranger than fiction.
So I need to make a disclaimer, right? Because I'm sitting here, but I love Steve. He's a great friend, a good man, and I absolutely love him. But I'm telling you, sometimes I look at him and I go, "What are you talking about?" But when I compiled, Daniel Holdings, who's normally a pretty logical, down to earth guy, when I compiled all of the stuff that he gave me and I connected the dots myself, buddy, sometimes life is stranger than fiction. I'm telling you, because I saw tons of evidence to the fact that there were, in fact, giants, not only under the earth, but they jump off Earth with, this is going to be even a bigger shocker. They jump off Earth with stargates or portals, and they come back again. So it's strange, audience, as this may sound to you. I've seen the evidence. I've connected the dots. I'm not I've written fiction, so you may think I'm a little off my rocker, but I've done my research as well, and I'm telling you, you can roll your eyes all you want. These things, I think, have at least their truth in reality.
Now, is this connected in any way with Antarctica and what that's kind of been shut down? You don't hear hardly anything now, but we know the military was highly involved. We've gotten all kinds of stuff. And getting back to the DNA of the UFOs, wasn't that the Anunnaki? Isn't that what was his name that wrote about the Anunnaki? Sitchin?
I don't know if Sitchin wrote that. That was a direct report, though, that I had read again in the midst of Steve's stuff. So it wasn't necessarily he could have written it as well, but Citchy could have written it as well. But I saw something that was a separate report. As far as Antarctica goes, now, okay, understand that one of the things that Mona told Nikolai is that there were hive worlds, plural. But there's and I don't want to get into the whole discussion. Is it a hollow earth? Is it a hot ball? I don't really want to go there. But what she said is that there were all kinds of worlds under the earth, and that some of them were giants, some of them were aliens or interdimensional beings that lived under the earth. Some of them were so far-fetched that they were the furthest thing from what we would think of as human. They were insect-like, some of them are cannibals. So the word is plural, worlds. So when you ask me about Antarctica, there are beings that according to Steve anyway, there are beings that still live in both Antarctica and the Arctic. And I think the reason why Antarctica was shut down, it wasn't that it was shut down. I think they've stopped the leaks of information from Antarctica. Because from all accounts, it's still very active, but we're not hearing the kind of things that we were hearing before. So I think they've plugged several of the leaks so that people aren't getting information out. But there's a pyramid in Antarctica. There's underground cities in Antarctica. So there's all kinds of stuff going on down there.
Well, I just read an article a little bit ago about a giant face that's emerging from out from under the ice. Did you see that, Larry?
Yeah, I have seen that.
So,
and I was going to mention too, guys. Talking about the helix or whatever, the strand. I know both you guys probably at one time watched with Gary Sinise with the movie Mission to Mars, and remember on that movie the DNA helix that he used M&Ms to realize the signal was involving a DNA strand to contact and communicate with the ancient technology. What do you think?
I do remember that movie. I do remember that movie.
I think it's part of the acclamation.
I always think, if they come and they tell us they made us, right? Well, who made them? Who created them, right? They didn't crawl out of the primordial ooze to be whatever they are. So, I mean, even that argument I think, has holes in it. But I do remember that movie. That was a good movie. I had that movie for a long time.
Well, it almost seemed like they were laying down the premise on the face on Mars routine. But when you really looked at what they were shown by the tall alien, which is kind of interesting, with this Mona, because the alien there was at least probably, 10, 12 feet tall. It was showing them how evolution on Earth, I mean, they went through the whole thing, and of course we all know that there are a couple laws of well-known laws, like the laws of thermodynamics, second law, entropy, and homogenesis, that kind of contradict all of that. But it seemed to me they were laying down a platform of evolution, because if we are evolving, then we don't need a Messiah. We don't need a Redeemer.
Yeah.
And this is where people, I think, make a mistake when they think that God is just simply using evolution. The whole premise of Jesus Christ is based upon creation and a fall and no evolution whatever. But anyway, what else you got, Larry, for a question? This is interesting stuff.
Well, I was going to bring up also, Daniel, and you're well aware of the Aztec the digs that they have come up with, the artifacts that show aliens, craft, beings, entities. I saw these in the cast, and I heard Steve Quayle mention Klaus Dona and involving this information. And what's odd, what you didn't know, I guess, Daniel, was I had previously, Stewart and I had seen some information about some ancient artifacts that had come from dug up in Mexico, and yes, somebody said they were counterfeit. Well, I'm a good friend with Klaus Dona, and I contacted Klaus about it, and Klaus didn't say where he got his information, but he said, I know all about those artifacts. I've seen them. I've looked at them. He said they're the real thing. He said they are the originals, and they depict what they depict, and he said nobody can change that. And Daniel, you saw the artifacts. What do you think, or what do you want to tell the people what was on those images? And I know Stewart probably seen some of them.
Well, talk about mind-blowing, this kind of stuff. And I think the artifacts that you're referring to in the presentation were Aztec. And I think Klaus initially, because he also has access to the Aztec artifacts, but I remember years ago Klaus actually came across some Inca artifacts or something that depicted the same kind of things. Now, what were those things? I think your audience would be stunned to look at the pictures depicting these graphic images. So one of those graphic images that didn't even make the presentation because it was too graphic, I'm just going to tell you now. But I'll clean it up for you. There was a big slab of art that I did see, and this slab showed various scenes on it. Aztec man and woman, and aliens. And so what you saw in this scene, in these various scenes, are the Aztec women having sex with the aliens and then having babies, and the aliens delivering the babies. So because that was so graphic, Steve didn't want to put that in the presentation, understandably so. But that's the kind of thing, as mind-blowing as it sounds, that we're referring to. There was another artifact there, and I think you remember this. It showed the Aztec women having babies. That showed a spaceship going up into the sky, and the alien on the spaceship, quote unquote alien on the spaceship, pointing down at the woman saying, yes, I see you, I'm coming back for you, or whatever, and the woman holding up the baby that was not human looking. It showed these artifacts. Also, there were other scenes on these artifacts where this Aztec was holding the head of an alien, right? So where did the Aztecs actually get the idea of decapitation from? Well, I think it's probably the aliens taught them how to do this. And the whole idea of human sacrifice, I think that was alien, and they showed the Aztecs how to do that, and it became much more bloodthirsty. But that's the kind of wild stuff that we're on there. And Klaus is the ultimate, the consummate professional and expert. I mean, if he says they're real, then I take his word on that. They're real.
Yeah, when I interviewed him, he had dug up some giant bones. He'd been trying to, I guess, you have to be kind of careful because people like the Smithsonian come and they grab all that stuff. And, of course, they're trying to hide the truth of giants because that verifies Scripture. And the last thing the global government black ops want is to have the Scriptures confirmed and verified as true and real. It sounds to me like the Book of Enoch, where it talks about how the fallen ones came down and taught mankind all kinds of weird stuff. And here we are, and we got, of course, Genesis. And what did the Lord say? As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be again. And, of course, that was the sons of God coming down and having sex with earth women and producing a race of giants. So I guess there we are, right? Happening again.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And Stewart, that leads me to something I wanted to bring up with you and your audience. We are entering a time. I mean, the reality of the world in which we live. I posted something on my Facebook. I don't do a lot of Facebook, and certainly I don't put anything personal on there, but I will post, things from time to time, and I came across this post and I shared it. It was a post. It was a sign in a store window, a bookstore window, and it said, "This is funny." It said, "Notice the apocalyptic section has been moved to current events." And I thought, how appropriate is that? Because that is really what we are looking at. All the things that we said might happen, that we wondered how things were going to play out. Stewart, we're living, Larry, we're living in those days. Folks, if you haven't believed it until now, I am here to tell you, we are in the end times. This is the end times. And I'm not going to sit here and say, well, it's going to take 3.5 years and blah, blah, blah. No, that's not the point. The point is that we are walking into perhaps the most supernatural time in all of human history. And we are about to see the weirdest, craziest, wildest stuff that we are not able to categorize or pigeonhole in our minds. The Bible says that in the last days that men's hearts will fail for fear at those things that are coming upon the earth. Now, why is that? That's because they begin to see things that they have no means to categorize. They have no means to base any previous experience on. Now, that's not to say that they're not also talking about terrible and awesome and destructive things. Certainly, those things are going to happen. But I believe that you're about to see these portals open up. You're about to see supernatural entities, in a world, particularly in our nation, that has begun to walk away from God. And folks, if you haven't understood this, we are in the great falling away period. That is what's going on now. Sociologists call it the post-Christianity period, meaning that Christianity is waning like crazy, and people are walking lock, stock, and barrel away from God. They're going to humanism. They're going toward, Satanism. They're going to anything that they can think of as long as it's not God. And so what we're faced with is a world that is supernaturally on tilt, and we don't have, if you're not based in the Word, if you're not based in the Bible, you don't have a relationship with the Lord, you don't have any means to categorize that. So people are going to start losing their minds. And Stuart, I firmly believe that we're going to see things in the very near future that just make no sense whatsoever outside of the Word of God.
Let me ask you a question, Daniel.
Yes,
I wanted to ask you this because you just said something about the tilt of the world. Things are really getting bizarre now. I'm not going to tell anybody that, to believe any of my experiences over the years, but, I have had some experiences. And actually, in one of your books, Daniel, you wrote that I actually operated myself within a portal. I stepped through in a portal. I won't go any further than that, but that was either fiction or faction, and I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, but after that, I did have an experience, though, that I want to bring up and get your opinion on, because I know in your books, and you've done some studies on CERN and portals, et cetera, and energies, and I was given an experience one night. I don't know whether it's a dream. It seemed too real for a dream, but I found myself at a dimensional breach, if you will, and that was the word I was given in this experience. I saw a breach. In other words, I was on the other side of the veil, or the other side of the dimension from ours, and Earth somehow had breached the dimensional wall or the veil and interjected a little bit of Earth or our time space inside this other dimension. Now remember, I was on the other side looking at Earth, the breach. And what happened, the Lord was there and angels were there, and there was a massive power flux that I can't even explain. It sounded like a giant roar come from behind me, and I have never seen violence that hit that breach and absolutely ejected everything on the other side of that dimension back into earthward, our time space, and the devastation was absolutely incredible on the earth side. Now, I brought that up because I did have that experience. I remember it very, very clearly. And, I know that I believe Nostradamus and a few other, people that predict things had predicted one time, I've read them, that something happens at Geneva and it's devastating and lots of people killed and the earth is messed up and all kind of stuff. And I was wondering, it just crossed my mind, CERN pretty much has gone black now, black operations. You can't even get information hardly out of CERN and what they're doing. And I just wondered, Daniel, what do you think of all that craziness?
Well, as you know, my first book is on CERN. It's on the Large Hadron Collider. And there's a lot of things that the Lord showed me that I put into that book about CERN. There's a lot of things that I studied about CERN. And more things have come to light since those days. And I did that book probably 9 years ago. How can I say this? So you remember, because I think you were part of the series, when I had my own blog talk show, or it was a different show, I don't know whichever one it was, I actually did a series on the thinning veil and how we were making these inroads into the adjoining dimension, supernatural dimension, at that time. So, again, that was some time ago, and what I think has happened since that time is that this veil between our reality and the dimensions that live right next to us, and they actually overlay on top of us, not right next to us. There are things we can't see because we are in this plane of understanding, this dimensional plane that doesn't allow us to see. We live in a 3D world, height, depth, and width, and Einstein said time was the fourth dimension. So we live in this world. We can't see the things that are on the other side, the other dimension. So I think there are times, as an aside, when people see demons and angels and all kinds of other crazy stuff, that they're seeing into the adjoining dimension that we normally can't see into. So I said all that to say this, that CERN, one of the things that I wrote in my books was that CERN wanted to bridge the gap. They wanted to transcend this dimension and be able to communicate or connect with the adjoining dimension. And again, it's fiction, so whatever. But a few years later, again, one of those many things that have come true in those books, and I can't take credit for them. They were the Lord's inspiration, not mine. But one of the things that came out years later is that is in fact what the CERN scientists have said on the record that they wanted to do. They wanted to bridge the gap. They wanted to interact with the adjoining dimension. Now, Larry, that's not very smart for some people that are so smart. Because that dimensional plane, that veil, that barrier that separates our world and their world is there for our own protection. It's there for a reason. God put it there so that we would not be harmed by the things on the other side. We weren't meant to coexist with them, with those things, whatever those things are, demons and angels and lots of other stuff, I'm sure. So I find it curious in your dream that you saw this rent, and then the result of all of that junk being pushed back into our dimensional plane was devastation. Because I think that is exactly what will happen. I don't know to what extent, but this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about, Stewart, that we are beginning to see things that are absolutely crazy. By the way, CERN has a quantum computer. They've had a quantum computer for years. We just recently read, a few weeks ago that Google's made headlines because they've got their own quantum computer. Well, CERN's had one for some time. And all the work that you're mentioning that they're doing in secret, they're doing based on that technology, that fallen angel technology, I might add. So they're using advanced technology to break into the adjoining dimensions, and we may never know exactly the damage that's occurring in our dimensional plane because, for one, they're not telling us. For two, we don't know how to categorize us. And I'm going to give you, we don't want to take too much time talking about such things, but I'll give you one perfect example. I firmly believe you've heard of the Mandela effect. I do think it's a real phenomenon. I think that it is a result of CERN piercing into these other dimensions. I can't prove that. I don't have any facts on it. I just have a gut feeling that all this stuff with the Mandela effect and all the other crazy stuff didn't start happening until CERN started breaching into that other dimensional plane.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I've just written a couple of books called Frequency, and what I was researching was the lockdown, that we are absolutely, this whole universe is in lockdown, and it's in lockdown for a very good reason, as you were just saying. And any attempts to break out of that lockdown are going to get met with, I think, severe consequences. Exactly what you're talking about. Because if CERN is attempting to storm the kingdom of heaven, so to speak, the Lord's simply not going to allow that. And, of course, we've been told by several people that a lot of the weaponry and stuff that they're developing is really based upon Satan's appetite to destroy Jesus Christ at his return to earth. And, this is really, when you really boil this thing down, this is a turf war. And planet Earth is the final background or the final turf of Satan, and it's going to get taken away from him. But he's going to put up a ferocious fight to not have that happen, and probably CERN's part of this, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think so, Stewart, either knowingly or unknowingly, that's what they're doing. Of course, they're scientists, and they think they should explore and have whatever rights they, have the right to explore whatever they want on one hand, but we also know just through their own actions and the things that they say and do that there's a spiritual bent to them. To them, science is their religion, and sometimes that religion, a lot of times actually, that religion of science is very dark, and I think they get their inspiration directly from the enemy. And I think that's there's no better example of that than what you just described. You just reminded me of something, though. Excuse me. You were talking about frequency. You did these books on frequency. I came across, and Larry, you and I actually talked about this. I came across an email or a Q alert. Actually, I saw it before it was posted, but saying that the frequency of Earth has changed. Do you remember seeing that, Larry?
Oh, yep. Absolutely, yeah.
And the words now what could cause such a change? See, I always want to go to the source. We could reflect on the results, but I want to go to the source. Why did something happen? And so when you look at why the frequency has changed, is it because of 5G? I don't think so. 5G has not been around that long, and there's not that kind of coverage. I mean, could it eventually? Yeah, obviously, I think it could. But when you look at, because audience, I mean, you may think such conversation is crazy, but the frequency on the Earth has been stable at 7.83 hertz for forever. Okay.
Yes.
Now it has jumped up to 16.5 hertz, and sometimes it hits 30 hertz. Now that's crazy, because 30 hertz is the same clock speed of our human brain, right? Yep. So all of this stuff is going on in the background that people just don't have a clue of. They're not aware of it. But I think the alert that I saw on Steve's website talked about how people are going crazy. Well, it's not just people. I'm sure that some of this has to do with animal die-offs that we've seen. Excuse me 1 second. So the other point is, what other effects does this kind of thing have on our environment? I'm not talking about our environment, let's say the rainforest. I'm talking about in this plane of existence that we live in called Earth, right? So you see in the word, Stewart, that later on, toward the end, it says that the Earth itself begins to stumble like a drunkard, right? Like Its clock speed is all knocked off. Now, I don't know what to make of this, except that it can have far-reaching effects like earthquakes, like maybe the Mandela effect. Is it something that happened from CERN? I don't know. All I know is that something on planet Earth has changed. And these things, this is interesting, guys, because these things only began to happen, all this crazy stuff. I mean, there's always been crazy stuff, but they've seemed to increase in the last, 5 or 6 or 7 years. Is it just me, or you guys think that as well?
No, that's absolutely true. In fact, the highest spike of the Schumann resonance is 90 that they've recorded so far. So it's a variable. It goes up, then it goes down, then there's a spike, then it goes back down. But my take on it is that this has something to do not only with mankind going basically berserk. I've always thought that the tribulation period was God's way of showing the human being, look, you're lost, you're fallen, and you're evil. And he's going to make it manifest for the whole world to see. Maybe this is his way of doing it, because if you get that Schumann resonance to a certain point, it causes irritability and anger and all of that. And I believe that the demonic realms are in the lowest of the frequency realms. When I was doing research on the books on frequency, it is all frequency, really. The Lord said the word. Well, word is vibrations. Vibrations are frequency and energy. Just like Tesla said, you want to understand the universe? Think in terms of vibration, frequency, and energy. And I think it's quite obvious that when we were created, we were at extremely off-the-charts frequency. When we fell, we're in a mid-range frequency. And the underworld is very low frequencies. And when you start looking at the charts that they have for emotions and color and all of that and the different frequencies, it all merges together. And I believe that we are headed for something we cannot get out of, unless you are totally protected by the Lord himself. Because this is going to, and Larry and I have talked about, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, what was all this business about zombies? Unless they already know this is coming, and the effect is going to be either euphoric, which Book of Enoch says that they think they're headed for an ascension, and that they all think they become gods. Well, what about the people that can't do that? What about the people that this frequency or resonance changes converts them into basic zombies? And that was brought up actually by Cliff High and his bots, that some people were just going to become zombified by these frequency changes. What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to bring this up and get you and Daniel to talk about this, baby. I don't think Daniel's read your book, Frequency, but they're incredibly good. And what's so interesting is, I've watched a lot of the data coming out of information on the Indian or the Native American shamans that Tom Horn and Steve Quayle and others have talked to, and they actually tell how that they can open some of these hidden gateways with a frequency or a sound. And also the same thing goes down into South America and Mexico and those portal areas. They say the shamans are able to give a frequency or sound, and those open. And at the same time, I wanted to bring up this movie that we've all watched, or a number of us have, where the alien in the spaceship that was he actually used it like a flute to create a frequency to actually turn on that ship and run it. So frequency is really heavily involved in everything around us.
You just jogged my memory about something. One of Steve's really deep sources, really high up sources, was talking to him about stargates. And he asked, how do you turn them on? And he said just what you said, Stewart. He said sound, frequency, and vibration. That's what he said. And symbols. Because there's symbols.
Remember the guy in Coral Castle down in Florida?
Yeah.
Have you ever? I mean,
no, I'm not familiar with it.
Well, I don't know exactly how to explain that. Maybe Larry could do a better job, but basically, he was mining huge rocks. Nobody knew how he did it. And he didn't have any means to do it. And not only did he hew them out, he also constructed a huge castle out of solid rock. Well, I guess he was bothered or something, but anyway, he had to move it. And he would hire truckers to come in, and they might take 2 or 3 of these huge blocks, or even one, but he would not allow the truck drivers to see how he did it, but he'd load them in like a couple minutes. And the only way you do that would be frequency, anti-gravity. What do you think?
In Japan, they have those trains that run by anti-gravity. They don't run on the tracks. Maybe that's lost technology that we don't have at large. Maybe that he was using something like that. I don't know, but that's really strange. And to my point earlier, you're going to start seeing really strange stuff like that everywhere. It's not just that one guy. You're going to see that kind of thing everywhere. But I think you're absolutely right. I think the idea of where we were as a creation, the frequency, the resonance that we used to have is changed, and I think it'll change even further.
Yes.
To your point of zombies, you always wonder how stuff like that, zombies get into popular mainstream thought. Well, it's introduced as a means to prepare, I think, society for what's coming, and I think you'll see that kind of thing eventually.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because why would the CDC come out and talk about zombies? Why would the military be talking about zombies? And I do remember seeing what they purported to be a Delta Force group, and I don't know where they were, but it was a satellite imagery of 4 or 5 Delta Force being surrounded by these people, and you could see the gunfire at them, but it didn't stop them, and they were all killed. Larry, you got any comment on that?
Yeah, that's really true. By the way, that movie I was referring to was Prometheus, which I think both of you have probably watched. Where
right.
I guess those were giants, and oddly enough, that's another movie where they claim to be the creators. You know what I'm saying? And with the DNA.
Yeah, weird. Where do we go from here, guys?
Well, that's the idea. Well, one more comment on what Larry just said. That's the idea of panspermia. And it seems that Hollywood's been propagating the idea of panspermia for years, so it doesn't surprise me. But anyway, they're going to say what they're going to say.
Yeah. Shall we go to something else that's more local? Dave Hodges has been running kind of a series, and I think probably Larry knows a lot more about it. He's been following it more closely than I have. But about Chinese troops south of the border, the Marines being activated for war on United States soil, and a possible invasion coming up from the south. Larry, what's the latest on that?
Well, what's interesting, and I've talked to Daniel a little bit, and Daniel, really only talk about what you want to, any of that data. But I was going to say also, Stewart, and of course Daniel, that remember what Red Elk said in his interview you had with him, Stewart, and I think he gave it in the Great Vision too that was done, where Red Elk was shown the invasion points of America. Now, saying all that to say this, that Stewart, you're also, and I believe, Daniel, you are too, aware that I was privy to some information of a military assessment a few years ago, before Red Elk died, by the military of invasions that were coming and their entry points into this country. So that told me immediately that we already know we're going to be invaded. Deep state does, probably not the American people, because they're still on the couch. But what's so interesting, though, because we're in a scenario that's really strange right now with the impeachment hearings, and as some of the experts have talked today, they say Trump literally has been so undermined that our enemies are moving against us all around the world. And Dave Hodges just put out, and I know you know Dave Hodges, Daniel. I know you're well acquainted with him. But he put out a new one today that was kind of interesting. He says, and the title of this video was, "If Trump removed, we're not to be." In other words, if Trump is removed from office, where Americans should not be in this country. And with all of this ongoing like it is, Daniel, just take your time, and any of this you want to get into. And I kind of thought to myself, because I'd mentioned to you, Daniel, I told you the other day, I said, I bet you're glad you're not in California, especially Southern California. And what would be your advice to someone that finds themselves in that place, because there's some pretty strange stuff going on around our borders?
Well, gee, I don't even know where to start with this, but I'll start with my current project, Midnight Strikes, because I've dedicated 3 chapters in Midnight Strikes to talking about the coming Civil War, American Civil War 2.0 is what I'm calling it. Mm-hmm. And I've broken it down pretty minutely so that people can follow my line of thinking in here. And of course, Steve and I have talked about various issues that have to do with it. But I will just say this, and I'm going to make some people mad at me. And I Stewart, I wish I could go back and take the blue pill. I want to take the blue pill.
I know you're feeling
because I know what I know, and I can't unknow what I know, and so I'm different than what I I used to be. So when people are slumbering on their couches, Larry, I kind of, I wish I was them sometimes because I know what's coming. And sometimes I wish I didn't know what's coming. So here's what I think. Let me go here because it's just in a chapter that I just got done. These are rhetorical questions because I know you guys know them well, know the answers to these questions well. But did you know that the United States is still in a state of emergency since 9/11? You all knew that.
Oh, yes. Actually, long before that.
It's never been lifted. And and I say this for the benefit of your audience that may not know this, but in the process of instituting that state of emergency, the Republicans at the time instituted the COG provisions, the continuity of government provisions, which that's not a good word, which institutes a shadow government that isn't elected and that isn't run by our elected officials. So currently there is a shadow government. It is the same government that JFK talked about, that got him killed. You can't talk about such things. But the point is that the world, as we think we understand it, is not that way at all. And so you look at this paradigm of the blue states and the red states, the Republicans and the Democrats, and we want to draw this line in the sand and say, I'm Republican or I'm Democrat. And it is political theater for our benefit to keep us distracted. And the reason I say this, and believe me, I used to be a staunch Republican, right? Highly conservative. I actually ran for local office back in California at one time as a Republican. So I'm well aware of how the political circus works. It was small office, local office, but the point is that the world as we understand it, as most Americans understand it, is it's superficial. It's not real. And when you look at what's going on with the impeachment proceedings, I can't look at them. They drive me crazy. I get angry. And what's going on with Trump and what the Democrats are doing and who said what and who did what. It's all a distraction to what's really going on. And what's really going on is what you're talking about, Larry, about troop movements and about the end game. Because the end game is where we're headed. Now, I always said that the Republicans and the Democrats are two sides of the same coin, that they are two wings, if you will, of the same bird. You got the right wing and the left wing, two wings of the same bird. And I always, now people, this is where people are going to get mad at me. And I have said this about Trump, that Trump, first of all, I think he's narcissistic. Listen, I wouldn't want Hillary. Let me clarify. He is much better than Hillary. Okay, I'm glad she didn't get in because it would be, we'd be already at the end of the road, right? Instead of approaching the end of the road, so we would already be there if she would have gotten in. But the point is that Trump made his money in casinos and real estate. You got to be a shark to swim in those waters. Trump is no saint, and he is ruthless. He's narcissistic, and you know this by the things he says and the tweets that he does. And he is self-centered, and I find it hard to defend some of the things he says and that he does. Now, again, he is better than the alternative, okay? But I make this point because you don't get to play in that sandbox unless you're part of that club. You cannot be president of the United States unless you are in with the crowd. And there are pictures after pictures, documented evidence that he was in thick with the Clintons and whoever else, whoever's the Bushes, whoever else, he was there. He was part of the crowd. And so he gets elected as being, an outsider, wanting to drain the swamp. And it resonates with people that are sick and tired of politics as usual. We want to throw all the bums out. And I can sympathize with the sentiment because I feel the same way. However, it's political theater. It's not real. So here's what's real. What's real is, audience, we are in a declared state of emergency since 9/11. And I don't want to go into 9/11 because it drives me crazy. But it provided that whole incidence of 9/11 provided them the means to start the end game. It gave them the means to institute COG provisions. It caused them to be in this place that they are now. Now, when you begin to talk about troop movements and all the stuff that's going on right now, you cannot separate that discussion from FEMA camps and martial law. Because troop movements in and of themselves are for a reason. Now, Trump's not going to be crazy enough to cross the border, because if he did, it would be a declaration of war on Mexico, even though he's going after the cartels. But he's not going to do that. So these troops are going to be fighting within the United States. So let me ask you a question. How soon you guys think that it will take for that fighting to spill out onto American streets and everyday people get caught up in it?
Yeah, once it gets started, it's just like a fire. And
it will be a fire.
Yeah, and I think, as you're talking about that, I was looking up the United Nations and what they have to say about it. This is Chapter 7, Action with Respect to Threats to the Peace, Breaches of the Peace, and Acts of Aggression. The Security Council shall determine the existence of any threat to the peace, breach of the peace, act of aggression, and make recommendations or decide what measures shall be taken in accordance with Articles 41 and 42. Basically, which is a communist charter, the United Nations Communist Operation. What they're doing is, I think, they're going to start something, either through an invasion of Chinese forces, and that's not new news. About 3 or 4 years ago, I heard truckers were saying that they had been delivering stuff into huge Chinese camps south of the border, Chinese military operations. And I don't know. How do you vet something like that?
Well, Stewart, I have some information, documented sources that say that they'll get this 5 million Chinese troops in Ensenada in Baja California, waiting to move in, waiting for the go word to roll over the border and go into California. Now, 5 million. In addition to that, there are Russian, Chinese, other foreign troops, and UN troops sporadically dispersed throughout the United States in some of the largest of our cities. And there's documented proof from individual eyewitness accounts of these Chinese and Russian troops and UN troops. We see these videos. You go online. You could look at the videos online. Now, these troops, let me ask you a question. When U.S. forces are stretched so thin, and there's something pops off in the Middle East, and we rush to the Middle East to fight, Iran or whatever the case may be, because they close the Strait of Hormuz or whatever. Wherever we go, and our National Guard's been stripped of all of its heavy armament, their A-10s, their helicopters. right? Who's going to quell the violence that has been propagated on the streets of America? It is under, you just said it, Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. They will use the UN Charter as justification for the go order to take over our country. And you wonder where the FEMA camps come in? They will begin to intern Americans, the most threatening Americans, I should say, the ones with guns, or the ones that believe in the Constitution, in those camps. And if you think that's, I'm sorry.
They're death camps, torture and death.
They are death camps. And audience, if you think that's far fetched, there's a guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. You might have heard of him. His name was, let me think. Oh, yeah. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Scalia. Said
who got murdered.
That Americans would be what's that?
He got murdered.
That's right. He got murdered. But he said that they would use internment camps again in the United States. And that didn't fit well with the powers that be. He was always talking out of turn, but you got to love him for it because he gave us some good stuff. But the point is, so we look at the theater, the political theater that's going on our televisions, and we're rooting for the Republicans or we're rooting for the Democrats. I'm not rooting for the Democrats, but you're rooting for whoever you're rooting for. And it's a distraction to what's really going on. Larry, you alluded to this a second ago. They just had a call up out of 29 Palms, California. That's a Marine amphibious base. They called up a whole battalion or more out of that base, and they're rolling down the streets in America toward the southern border to root out cartels, drug cartels that have crossed over, that continually cross over. I know people that live in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, and in California. The cartels are running wild down there, and Trump, after the thing with the Mormons in Baja California, said enough is enough. He gave the Mexican government a chance to do the right thing and take care of it, and since thus far they haven't, and so he's going to take care of it supposedly on this side of the border. But I think it's all theatrics. Because they've tried this, guys. They have tried to incite violence on the streets of America. When you look at Ferguson, when you look at South Carolina, when you look at other places where they've tried to get this race riots to start, and they couldn't get it started. They got to do something because what's that?
Baltimore was a classic example.
Yeah. So if they can't, institute violence that way, they're going to trigger it some other way. And so I think that's what this is. This is the end game. There's only a matter of time. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I think the drug cartels need to be rooted out. They need to be, they need to be killed and destroyed. But that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that's going to start a spark of an explosion that cannot be quelled. They will get their splinter. They will get their division. They will get this fragmentation of the United States in a civil war come hell or high water. And that's what they're going for. They're going for their end game.
Well, what's kind of interesting in the book Rules for Radicals, they said that what you need to have is a pivot man or a trigger man, so to speak. And what this, you can't use ideology, you can't use maybe a corporation. You got to use an individual that people either love or hate. He divides the nation. And I remember being told some time ago that the Secret Service knew that Trump had been selected by Deep State back in 2013 to run against Hillary Clinton. Now, Hillary was winning. So what they did was they had James Comey, who is also Deep State, come forward and produce a lot of damaging information about Hillary
to throw the election over to Trump, because it doesn't make any sense that Comey would have done what he did against his own people unless he had been told to. And Hillary made mention of the fact more than once that they will not allow me to be president. So it all begins to make sense. He's the trigger guy.
I do remember saying that. That's right. Well, I call it the pendulum of discontent, right?
Yes.
Now, you're right. I didn't remember that was in Rules for Radicals, Saul Alinsky's book. But when you think about Obama, what greater lightning rod could there have been for either discontent or people to gravitate to him? Obama was that guy, last election cycle. It swung, when he got elected, the pendulum swung all the way on the other side. And that's,
right.
If you recall, when the Republicans won the Senate, they won the House, and they eventually won the presidency. It was because of him, because he was that polarizing factor. And now you're right, you have Trump, who's also a polarizing factor, but I think he's the man of the hour that will usher us into this dissolving of the United States. Because the only thing standing between the New World Order's desire for a one-world global Luciferian government is the United States of America. And if they could divide us and splinter us, they would get their one-world government, because we would eventually fall to the wayside. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. They are trying to destroy this country, and it doesn't matter which side of the political aisle that you're on. The fix is in, guys. I hate to say that, and I'm not being pessimistic. I'm a realist, and I refuse to hide under one political party or another when I think that they stole the system a long time ago.
Well, I think the other thing that's going on too is the Lord has picked in His own way Trump, because of Obama wouldn't do anything about Israel at all. In fact, he hates Israel. But
right.
If you go into the prophecies about Israel, their Messiah is a person who recognizes them and elevates them politically. And so this is kind of interesting, because you got rabbis that are talking about two messiahs, kind of an anti-messiah and then a good messiah. And this is kind of interesting how this is going to play out, because Trump has done a lot for Israel. And, of course, they're coming up on the time of Jacob's trouble, but they don't know that. They're going to find it out the hard way, I guess. What would be your comment there?
Well, let me just back up 1 second. The Bible says that God appoints leaders and kings, right?
Yes.
So
yep.
I do believe, you may think I'm talking audience out of the side of my mouth, but I do believe that Trump was appointed by God to be president. I do think this, but probably not for the reason, audience, that you think I think this. The reason that
absolutely.
I think this is because Trump gave us time to, and here's the word, right? It's the word of the night that I want to leave your audience with. Trump gave us time to repent.
Yes.
He gave us time to come back to the Father.
Right.
Because the whole reason that we're having this crazy discussion is because we understand that, life is not based upon the world as we see it. It is based upon whether we acknowledge Him or not, whether we agree with Him or not. It's based upon the fact that God the Father created us for Himself, for His good pleasure. And He sent His Son to die for us on a cross, that we would walk with Him, that we would fellowship with Him, that we would know Him. And all of this stuff that we see in the media, that we see in the world, all the crazy stuff, all of that stuff is designed to distract us from the real truth. And the real truth, audience, is Stewart's absolutely right. This is God's timetable, right? We have some say in it from time to time, but the fact is God has set a certain time to be fulfilled. That is, he's given the earth and us a certain amount of time, and that time is almost up. So regardless of whoever was president at the time is up when the time is up. So I think we're headed, I said it earlier in the discussion, that this was the end of the age, and people need to understand what that means. We are headed to the culmination of the history of mankind. And soon there will be a time when time is no more. Well, so the question is, where are we going to fall in this? See, we can get caught up in the craziness of the election cycles. We can get caught up in the craziness of the news, or even of the fantastic stuff that we've discussed some tonight. But the fact is that your life and my life only has meaning when we walk with the creator of the universe and his son. And, this is not religious talk. This is realism, as real as it's going to be. And we need to understand that regardless of what happens to the United States, regardless of what happens even to Israel or, to our very lives, the only thing that matters is, do we know him? And more importantly, does he know us? That's all that matters.
Yeah, it's too bad that, well, of course, prophecy said the apostasy would come. And as you said earlier, we're right in the middle of it. And I'm sure Larry would agree. Larry, what are your last final comments, too, before we run out of time here?
Well, I just really want to thank Daniel for coming on, and that really, really excellent word that he gave right there at the last, because it makes people focus. And I would say the show tonight, if nothing else, and as Daniel said, the timeline we're in and where we are on it, it's time to pray harder.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Absolutely. Any final question you got, Larry, for a quick answer?
No, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to his book, and I'll tell you what, this is a pretty strange time, but I think, Daniel, a lot of your books are full of faction.
Well, this particular book's going to be nonfiction, so it'll be true, and based upon all the stuff that's going on in the world, as I said, it should be available sometime after the first of the year, if not before. You'll find it on my website, danielholdings.com. You can find my other books, Cooper Chronicles, on cooperchronicles.net or danielholdings.com, and I'm sure that Steve will be carrying it on his website as well. But, guys, thank you so much for having me on. It's been something, and my voice aside, it's always good to be with you guys, and thanks for making me think.
Well, we'll have to have you back on when your voice is a little better. I'll send you the frequency books. You might get a kick out of them. Obviously nonfiction. It's based more on scientific principles and whatnot of what they have already found out. Science literally has proved that the Bible is absolutely true. They just don't know it. It's amazing. Some of the things they proved, and but they still are. Science, as you said before, is God of the world, basically. If science says it's not true, it's not true. Any final comments,
that's right.
Dan?
Well, just that, audience, thank you so much for hanging tough with us. I know we went everywhere and every which way in this conversation, but hopefully you've gleaned some good information out of it, and I look forward to being with you all next time.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on, and Larry, thank you for hanging in there and all your excellent questions. And folks, we'll be with you next week as things progress. and just keep you posted and updated. Anyway, thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks a lot, Dan. Thanks a lot, Larry. And heads up, people, your redemption draweth nigh. It's getting closer by the minute. Thank you. Good night, everyone.